Disco spun, shimmied, and shone throughout the 1970s, but it had a dark side, and the artists at the top of the charts would soon learn that not all that glitters are mirrored disco balls. In the early 1970s, disco emerged from an urban subculture populated by marginalized artists who were otherwise shut out of the mainstream, including Black and Latino people and the LGBTQ community. New York City DJs like David Mancuso created underground clubs to showcase these artists and made arrangements with the police not to raid them. Mancuso, known as one of the most influential figures in nightlife history, threw epic underground parties every Saturday night at his apartment, known as The Loft.
The Loft was a community. You didn't have money, and as long as you had that invitation, you got in.
Influential sound system builder Alex Rosner remembered the Loft's underground vibe, telling authors Bill Brewster and Frank Broughton in the book Last Night a DJ Saved My Life. It was probably about 60% Black and 70% gay. There was a mix of sexual orientation. There was a mix of races. This was a time when nightclubs were being raided and members of the LGBTQ community were being openly abused and arrested by the police. In the throes of the gay liberation and civil rights movements, people from all walks of life gathered at house parties like Mancuso's before disco bled into the mainstream. And as the decade progressed, people who lived on society's margins began to come out and party in public. The 1970s were also the height of the disco biscuit, also known as Quaaludes. Ludes became a club favorite because they increased sexual arousal. What was originally intended as a painkiller and sleep aid soon became known as a drug that released inhibitions and had a euphoric effect when mixed with alcohol. Unfortunately, this made it easy to take advantage of people while they were under the drug's spell.
They can actually feel a sense of dissociative amnesia. And what that means is essentially they may not be connected to reality.
By 1972, the drug became so popular, it created political panic. Congress held hearings to debate whether Quaaludes should be classified as a Schedule II controlled substance, and medical journals and the media began to report on the drug's dangers. But if you think that's why the drug was banned by the Food and Drug Administration, think again. Medically known as methaqualone, Quaaludes were outlawed in the United States in 1982 because they were unprofitable. In 1981, the chairman of the William H. Rorer Pharmaceuticals Company told the press, "Quaaludes accounted for less than 2% of our sales, but created 98% of our headaches." Not that making them illegal stopped people from taking them, of course. Velvet ropes, doormen, VIP lists, and flashy DJs, these all started during the disco era. The most infamous discotheque was undoubtedly Studio 54 in New York City, frequented by A-listers like Andy Warhol and Bianca Jagger. Speaking with CBS News, former owner Ian Schrager said, "Studio was more than a discotheque. It was more than a nightclub. It was a cultural phenomenon."
It was the first time that it felt like people were non-judgmental. Everybody was fine with everybody else's culture.
The nightclub opened in 1977, and some truly crazy stuff happened there, like the night they unleashed 4 tons of glitter onto the floor. Schrager said, "You would see it in people's homes 6 months later, and you knew they'd been at Studio 54 on New Year's." But the fun and games would soon come to an end. In 1978, Studio 54 was raided by IRS agents for drugs and tax evasion. It probably didn't help that in an interview with New York Magazine, co-owner Steve Rubel made some unwise comments about the club's profits.
Steve said, "Only the mafia does better, but don't tell anybody."
Apparently, Studio 54 had paid only $8,000 in taxes in 1977. The feds found mass amounts of Quaaludes and cocaine stored at the club, but owners Schrager and Rubel were taken off to jail in style. Celebrities, including Jack Nicholson and model Gia Karanji, joined the pair as they were serenaded by Liza Minnelli and Diana Ross for a proper bon voyage. In 1979, President Jimmy Carter and his administration averted a drug scandal that could have shaken his already rocky presidency. Carter's chief of staff, Hamilton Jordan, was alleged to have been seen snorting cocaine in Studio 54 the year before, although it may have been a setup orchestrated by the infamous conservative lawyer Roy Cohn. According to People magazine in 1979, not even Jordan's defenders denied his reputation as a partygoer. One version of the story claimed Carter's press secretary, Jody Powell, was with Jordan at the club. The FBI questioned them both, but they denied any wrongdoing.
You saw with your own eyes Hamilton Jordan use cocaine?
Yes.
So how did Roy Cohn enter into it? Cohn had been hired by Studio 54's owner to help them with obstruction of justice and conspiracy charges. When Cohn heard through the grapevine that Jordan and Powell had visited the club, he saw an opportunity. He taped a statement from the dealer who allegedly sold drugs to Jordan and tipped off the FBI, hoping to damage Carter's administration. Luckily for Jordan, Powell, and President Carter, the cocaine allegations never led to an indictment. In November 1980, disco superstar and Studio 54 regular Grace Jones was a guest on The Russell Hardy Show. During the broadcast, Grace was aggravated that Hardy kept turning away from her. Then she physically attacked him, whacking him on the shoulder, saying,
"Don't turn your back on me anymore."
I can't look at you. Now, hold.
In Jones's memoir, she gives a bizarre but on-brand explanation for her behavior. The day before the show, she'd done a shoot in a location she described as piles and piles of bird dried up over patches of decaying wasteland. As a result, her sinuses got infected, so when somebody offered her some, quote, really bad coke to pepper up, she partook. In Jones's defense, it's rude to turn your back on someone. Nevertheless, it's a tad unfortunate that this clip is the first thing that comes up on YouTube when you search the name of this larger-than-life glamazon, but that's show business. During the disco era, members of the LGBTQ community finally felt safe to meet up en masse and dance the night away. But with this newfound freedom came the emergence of a horrifying disease.
We have a disease here which is new, which was not here a decade ago, and we have no cure.
HIV/AIDS would go unrecognized in the US until 1983, but in 2016, NBC News reported on a research study that concluded that HIV began to spread in New York City around 1970. University of Arizona virus expert Michael Worraby told reporters HIV had spread to a large number of people many years before AIDS was noticed. The findings suggest that the virus spread from New York City to San Francisco around 1976. Tragically, there was very little government support for those suffering from AIDS, which became a stigma used to further discriminate against minorities. At the time, HIV/AIDS disproportionately affected homosexual men, a tragedy that was felt in the disco scene. In an article in Vice, journalist Steve Weinstein writes, "Club culture inevitably affected and was affected by the epidemic. Often, I was relieved to see people at the clubs. I had assumed they had died in the interim." Freddie Mercury of Queen was a disco hero and gay icon of the 70s and 80s, but in 1987, Mercury's HIV diagnosis saw the rock legend grow thin and feeble long before he went public with his status in 1991, shortly before his death. While the HIV epidemic was thought to be widely spread by the gay community, everyone was vulnerable. Sharing needles or having unprotected sex with people of any gender or sexual preference, but especially those with multiple partners, were equally dangerous practices. Mercury was open about the scope of his sex life, saying, "I'm doing everything with everybody." Sadly, Mercury died before the development of the antiviral treatment that could have helped him live longer. Sylvester James, known simply as Sylvester, was an openly gay performer in the late 70s and early 80s. He made a splash with the exotic drag ensembles and trademark falsetto voice that made him a standout talent at the height of the disco era. When he was diagnosed as HIV positive, he made a conscious effort to educate the LGBTQ community about the virus, particularly within the Black community. In interviews, Sylvester was open about the fact that he was dying of AIDS. He lost his life to the virus in 1988. Known as the Queen of Disco, Sylvester's biggest hits include Dance, Disco Heat, Body Strong, and the disco party anthem, You Make Me Feel Mighty Real. All were dropped at the height of disco fever in the late 1970s. Sylvester's biographer Joshua Gamson described Sylvester's music, saying, "You've got the words of a person who is just matter-of-fact about their sexual desires, about the freedom to do with their bodies and their desires whatever they want to do, and you can dance to it."
He crossed over. He was a gender-fluid Black man in mainstream music.
While he died too young, Sylvester left a powerful, positive legacy, and he requested that he be buried in a red kimono and matching lipstick. What's more disco than that? Disco was at its peak in 1979. However, the anti-disco movement had also gathered steam and would reach its boiling point in Comiskey Park in Chicago, Illinois on July 12th of that year. The backlash, which had been steadily brewing for years, came to a head in 1978. Shock jock DJ Steve Dahl was fired when his radio station began to play nothing but disco. He then coined the phrase, "Disco sucks." Next, Dahl orchestrated Disco Demolition Night. Fans were asked to bring disco albums in exchange for cheap admission to a Detroit Tigers-Chicago White Sox doubleheader. The event drew a crowd of about 48,000. Darlene Jackson, who was 10 years old at the time, remembers watching the event on television. In an interview with WBUR, she said, "They got really, I would say, violent. It was so primal and tribal. A giant box full of disco records exploded, leaving a smoking crater in the middle of center field. With records whizzing about like frisbees, people stormed the playing surface, and the White Sox had to forfeit the game." Many believe the anti-disco zealots were motivated by racism and homophobia. And as recently as 2019, the Chicago White Sox actually commemorated the anniversary as a promotional event to much disgust. That night was the beginning of the end of disco. At the time of Disco Demolition Night, disco diva Gloria Gaynor was at the top of the charts. The I Will Survive legend believed the event was a racially charged monetary decision set up by the record companies. By 1979, the American music industry was undergoing its worst slump in decades, and disco was considered the culprit. Gaynor, among other disco artists, suspected rock music producers staged the demolition because they were losing money. A representative for A&M Records was quoted by the Los Angeles Times saying, "Radio is really desperate for rock product. They're all looking for some white rock and roll." Rock critic Dave Marsh told Today that he was appalled by the event, saying, "It was your most paranoid fantasy about where the ethnic cleansing of the rock radio could ultimately lead. It was everything you had feared come to life." Meanwhile, in an interview with The Independent, producer Nile Rodgers, the guitarist of the disco band Chic, who later became known for his work with Madonna, likened the movement to Nazi book burning, saying, "This is America, the home of jazz and rock, and people were now afraid even to say the word disco." After 1980, disco saw a sharp decline. Donna Summer and Michael Jackson songs still populated the airwaves, but disco jams were now labeled dance, pop, or electronic music. By the 1990s, the glittery hedonism of disco inspired a resurgence of nightclub culture. Films like Boogie Nights, Last Days of Disco, and chart toppers like Pulp's Disco 2000 proved 90s club culture was a direct descendant of the disco era. But this mutated version of disco culture wasn't without its own tragedies. On March 18, 1996, a deadly fire broke out at Ozone Disco in the Philippines, killing 162 out of 350 guests. It was the worst fire in the Philippines' history, and one of the worst blazes to ever hit a nightclub. And then there was the drug-fueled 1996 killing of Andre Angel Melendez by Robert Freeze Riggs and Michael Alec, a New York City party promoter and club kid. The crime shocked the city, and many iconic nightclubs closed in its wake.